So welcome to the first Elevate HR of 2024. Today we are going to do a deep dive into HCM, and I'm going to turn it over to Brendan, who is the master of all things HCM. So take it away, Brendan.
Sweet. Trying to be the master of how to share my screen. Here it is. Okay. Can you guys see that? Sweet. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to our first Elevate HR of the year. Today, we get to go into a magical world of an HCM deep dive. So on the agenda for today, we're first just going to kind of talk about the basics and the trainings required to even get into HCM. And then my goal for this presentation was to kind of build it to kind of see how each thing kind of builds on top of each other. So we're going to start with position updates, then go through template-based transactions, also known as a TBT, and then we'll go through job data. And then after all that, we'll touch on what promotions look like, kind of how we go about calculating the math for our FTE changes. We'll touch on the BSI, multiple components of pay. We'll go through the mechanics through CU employee reported time. And that's kind of want to highlight some of the deadlines from our payroll calendar, because a lot of the stuff will have to do with payroll. And then we'll end it just kind of going over some reports that are available in HCM. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Deanna will be my moderator for that today. And then if it's easier, you can always just come off of mute as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing is just the basics. So HCM stands for Human Capital Management. And within HCM, we're able to help run payroll, additional pay, store personal information, run reports, etc. For these items to be correctly entered into HCM, we have transactions or updates that need to be submitted. So most common types are position updates and template-based transactions. So the HRBP, the HR business partner, that's you guys, will be the one to enter it in. And then someone in either SOMHR or Central HR will then be that approver. And then we do have an approval workflow guide, which I have linked, that kind of helps figure out who should be approving what if you're not totally sure. And so with that, I will be sending out this slideshow also at the end, so that way you can have all these links as well. For pay to be correct, they need to be entered in and reading accurately through job data and our CU employee reported time. And then if we're having issues, if there's system or error issues, the HCM community is the best contact, and then that's their email there. And then for corrections needed to be made through HR HCM corrections, there's that email there as well. And if you ever aren't sure who to contact, myself or Alicia will be the one that can kind of help guide you into who is the best contact for that. Next is just a quick overview of the trainings required for HCM access. So depending on what type of role you are in, will determine which access is required. So most HRBPs will fall in the HCM CU payroll personnel liaison role. The link here, it gives you the link to the HCM community guidance and kind of how to get, the link here will provide guidance on which role you might be and what trainings are required in order to get that access. And then upon completions of the trainings, you'll need to request access through CU Identity Manager, also known as OIM. So once you finish your trainings, it typically takes between 24 and 48 hours for it to even show up in the OIM database. So if you submit your access request right away, it might not read and you might get a denial pushback. So if you do get that, just wait a day, resubmit it, and then they should be able to see that and help get that information, get your access over to you. So now we're going to really jump in and we're going to start with position updates. So when we open up a position update, we have 5 different tabs. We have the description tab, specific information tab, budget and incumbents, CU position data, and CU position compensation. And what we're going to do next is I'm going to go through each tab and just highlight kind of the important fields and just some kind of tips and tricks on how to best go about managing what each function kind of is for that. So first up, we have our description tab. And the first thing I want to look at is everything that's in this position information here. So the first thing we look at is the effective date. The effective date on a position can only be used once and is determined based off of headcount status, and reason code. So if the headcount status is open, that is meaning the position is vacant, and we recommend using the first of the month we are in when updating the position. And this allows for other updates to be completed in case something is missing on the initial update. And then if the headcount status is filled, that means there's an incumbent in the position. So that means there's someone in the position it's filled. We recommend using our position reason code guide to help determine that effective date. And then next we have our position status, which is down here. So position status is showing as approved, then you can move on to the next steps. So that means we've reviewed what we needed and we've approved it. If it's showing as submitted, it means it's pending approval. So that means either someone in SOMHR or someone in central HR is just needing to review the position update still. And then the next thing we see a lot is if it's showing as proposed, it means the position has not been submitted successfully and we cannot fully approve it. So sometimes when it's stuck in proposed, we don't even actually see it sitting in our queue to approve. And that just means that there's a submit button and that submit button wasn't clicked. So that submit button is found underneath the CU position data tab. So if you're ever seeing it stuck in proposed, go back into your position and push submit again, and it'll then send it. It should change the status to submitted, and then we can review and approve it. So now continuing along the description tab, we have job information. So it's all this information down here. So the business unit will always be UAMC. So as soon as you create a new position, since we're all on Anschutz campus, it's going to automatically populate to be UAMC. The job code is whatever job code you're wanting this position to be. So for this one, it's an HR Principal Pro. And then the reg temp and regular shift fields, so these two right here, those automatically populate with the job code. So you don't need to worry about updating those. And then next below that is the title. So the title will automatically populate to match the job code. You can change this title though, to update the field to whatever working title you want it to be. So for this one, it's just an HR Principal Pro and the title's there. But I know for like HR shared services, they're in HR Pro positions, but they changed the working title HR Specialist, and that's totally fine. That's updated there. Next, we have our full part-time field, which is over to my right. This will automatically fill in as full-time. If it needs to be part-time, you'll need to manually change that. There for staff to be full-time, you're at 40 standard hours, 100%. Anything below that, you're considered part-time. And then for faculty, you're considered full-time if you're 50% and above, and then you're considered part-time if you're 49.99% or below. The field doesn't necessarily drive anything in HCM. So if it's incorrect, we'll still approve it because it's not negatively affecting anything anywhere. But we do like clean data, and if you're ever wanting to fix it, and that's something that needs to be fixed, you can use the other reason code. So it'll be OTH to get that fixed. And then last is the union code and the short title. You can ignore both of those. The union code I've never seen filled in, and then the short title just kind of mirrors what your job code is. So now we continue down to our work location. So that's all these fields here. So the region, the regular region, that'll always say USA. I've never seen it be anything else. That's something else at the end that just automatically populates to show that. Next, we have our department, and that should reflect the department number that the position is being created for. So that's really whatever department you do. So this one's in the dean's office, department number is 20029. And then to our right, the company, this will always say CU. And I don't think this is actually an editable field, so that'll always say CU. Next is the location. The location is usually tied to the department number. So whatever department number you put in, this location field automatically gets populated to match that. If it has to be a different location number, you can manually change that. And it just shows the location that the incumbent in the position is or will be located in. So if you guys haven't realized yet, this is my position number. So I'm in the dean's office and I'm in the Fitzsimmons building if you ever need to find me. Next, we have the dot line. Next we have the reports to field. We'll jump down here. And so the reports to is the position number that this position reports to. So we put position number in bold because obviously report to a person, but in the position update, we have to put the position number that it goes to. And then next to the reports to field is the dot line. And so the dot line is sometimes used. You can leave it blank. It doesn't have to be filled in. It doesn't necessarily drive anything, but it's often used to show if someone has like a secondary supervisor. So you have like one main supervisor and the dot line will show who is like their secondary supervisor. And then last thing here we have is supervisor level and security clearance. This is typically all left blank and you don't need to worry about these fields. And if they do need to be used, employee services will fill in those parts if needed. The only time I've really ever seen either of these used is a security clearance, and that's when COVID first started. and we weren't allowed to be on campus. So if you were on campus, you had to have that security clearance, and that's where this was put in here. So that's really ever filled in, we'll kind of reach out and kind of ask why that's being filled in, because as of now, there's really no reason that we need to be worrying about entering anything in there. And then the last two things we have on our description tab is salary plan information and then the USA drop-down flag. So under salary plan, we have salary admin grade, salary admin plan, grade, and step. This auto-populates, don't worry about it. I think it's kind of tied to the job code, and I think Employee Services kind of uses it to figure out taxes and stuff. Don't need to worry about that. Just kind of go with whatever it fills in as. The standard hours is where we need to pay attention the most. So this is where the standard hours for the position are updated, and it affects the percent of time of the position. So we always use standard hours, FTE, and percent of time interchangeably because it all does mean the same thing. So if you're 40 standard hours, you're a 1.0 FTE. If you're 32 hours, you're a 0.8 FTE, etc. And then the work period should always be W. Even if they're an hourly employee and they're only going to work hours, you'll set those standard hours to 1, but we still want to leave that to W. And that just kind of helps payroll process things better. And then next in our description tab, we have the USA flag. So this doesn't automatically open, and this is where we see the FLSA status. So you'll need to click the drop down on the USA flag here, and it'll drop it down, and that's where we see the FLSA status. And it will usually automatically populate to exempt. So exempt means that the position is not overtime eligible, and non-exempt means that the position is overtime eligible. So when you're looking through these, for the most part, they will be exempt. I believe if you have positions that are usually always non-exempt, so for example, like an admin assistant, I believe those also change to non-exempt. But when we get into issues where you need to make sure you're paying a lot more attention to FLSA status, is if you have a staff member that's dropping below the FLSA threshold of 35,568, that's when that status should be changing to non-exempt. So always be wary of when you're fixing standard hours on what the FLSA status should be. And that's mainly just for staff positions. Faculty are usually always exempt. Another fun thing about the FLSA status is we have some very old positions. So before HCM actually became a thing, we had some older position numbers that were kind of migrated over for some faculty. And for some reason, those auto-populated to be non-exempt. So as you catch those, or as we catch those, we kind of ask you to fix those to be exempt, just so that way we can have clean data across the board. It looks like there is a couple of questions. Let's go ahead and answer those now.
Okay, so for student assistants, can we change the standard hours to what we anticipate they will work so that it's more accurate?
You can. It's better to put it at 1 standard hour, just because since students work different hours every week, you're going to have to manually enter in those hours. So it's going to be whatever feeds into CU time. And student positions can't be above 20 standard hours. So as long as it's below 20, that's fine if you want to make sure it shows right away. But I recommend just always putting 1.
And then is it true when you change the hours that the FLSA status automatically changes to exempt?
Not when you change hours. We'll kind of get into it a little bit later too. There's certain reason codes you use though that'll automatically change the standard hours back to 40. So I know like when we do a job code change or like a faculty promotion, so using like JCC or FAC as the reason code, if those hours aren't at 40, it automatically changes it to 40. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to those hours and moving it back down correctly if it shouldn't be something less than 40.
And then if the position currently has a security status of critical, clinical, or something, and they're doing an update, should they remove it?
For those, Jean, do they need a critical status still for that? Is there like specific lab that only they're allowed to be in?
No, when I noticed that I was doing a position update for just one of our clinical faculty members, and I noticed, and I'm trying to find it again to tell you exactly how it was worded, but it had some kind of an essential or critical access designation because they were a clinical care provider. So I assumed that was done during COVID, and I just wasn't sure at the time if I should just leave it, because normally, like, I don't think their access would be considered essential or critical, for the definition of access that you have to be there when the weather's bad, etc. I don't think that would normally be their designation. So I just wasn't sure whether to leave it or delete it.
Oh yeah, let me reach out to employee services really quick just to make sure. I think we'll be fine to delete it. I just don't want to delete it and that somehow does something to their badge where they lose access to it. But let me double check on that and I'll get back to you.
Thanks.
Okay, sweet. Now we're gonna hop on over to our specific information tab. So there's two most important things under this tab. The first one is the update incumbents box. And this is also most important when the headcount status is filled, because that means we're going to affect somebody that's actually in the position. So when there's someone in the position and it is checked, that means it's going to feed into their job data. So whatever update we're making and that box is checked, it's going to feed into their job data with that effective date. And when it is unchecked and approved, it means that update will not feed into their job data. So the most common one we see a lot is percent of time changes. So that reason code's PCT, that effective date's going to be the date it needs to occur. So usually it's like the first of a month. So January 1st, let's say someone's FTE, PCT is changing to 20 standard hours. So you make the change on the description tab. So under the incumbents box, you want to make sure that box is checked because we want that to feed into their job data to change those standard hours. Because when payroll runs, it runs based off of job data. So you want to make sure those hours are feeding correctly into job data. So that's why we check it. If it's the headcount status is vacant, so there's no one in it and it's checked, it's fine because there's nobody in the position for it to affect. So if it's checked and it's vacant, that's fine. It's not going to affect anything. So next down on the specific information tab, there's an education and government drop down that you have to click for it to drop down. There, the most important fields are the classified indicator and the FTE fields. So classified indicators should correspond with the job code being used. The correct options for each job code can be found on the HCM parameters guide. And then the FTE field should match the standard hours entered in. So for example, if the standard hours are at 40, then the FTE should be 1. They should also automatically change with your standard hours. So if you change it to 32 standard hours, the FTE should be showing 0.8. Always double check that though. I've noticed with older positions that were migrated over when we started position updates don't always fully correspond with the FTE. So you want to make sure that gets changed. The FTE field itself doesn't affect anything in HCM, but I know when we run reports, we often run things based off of FTE because it's easier to read than standard hours. So you want to make sure that FTE field is correct so that way we're not using bad data. Next is the budget and incumbents tab. So this tab shows the incumbent that is in the position if it is filled, and if it is an open position, there will be no information in this tab. So here the headcount status is filled, and then I blurred it out for privacy things, but it would show you their employee ID, their name, and then if you click this job data tab here, it'll open up their job data in a different pop-out screen so you can kind of see what it would look like in job data. Next, we have our CU position data tab. So this is our 4th tab down. So this is where we approve or deny the position update. So you guys don't have it on your end, but we have approve, deny. And then if we deny it, we have to add comments. The main thing you're looking at for here is the campus box. So this box right here. And the campus box is where mail gets sent to for the employee. So when you're underneath this tab, you want to make sure you're looking at the campus box. And also this is where that submit button is I was talking about. So your save button's here. So you want to push save and then submit to make sure it gets fully submitted over to us for review and approval. And then the last thing we have on position updates is the CU position compensation tab. So we are not able to make any edits to this field, but this is where you can view what the unique compensation code is for the employee that is in it. And currently it's only for staff. And then if you find that the unique comp code, so it's this one right here, is incorrect, you can work with TAC to make sure to get that updated. I think the best time to check those is if someone's getting promoted to the next level. So if you have someone that's a research services clinical entry and they're going to the intermediate level, you want to make sure that this is changing to match the intermediate level as well. So that way when Lori and I have been double checking as well, mainly Lori for now, but we make sure and do audits to make sure it's correct. But if you're seeing something is wrong, reach out to us or TAC and we can work to make sure it gets fixed correctly. And then to end position updates, here are some helpful tips that I kind of hope will be most used. So remember that you can only use the effective date on a position once. So by that, I mean, if you use 1/15/24 as the effective date, you can no longer use 1/15 or any date prior to that on the effective date. So if something is wrong with the position, you need to make an edit, you'd then have to use 1/16 or later. So if it's a new position, it's open, there's nobody in it, it's okay to use that because we're not affecting anybody. If it's filled and it's wrong, that's when we have to work with corrections to get it deleted out. So always be wary of the effective date when you're doing the update. That's usually the first thing I look at if I have to make a position update. And then with that, make sure you're paying attention to what reason code you are using, because then this will often drive the effective date that should be used. So the one I think I've been using is PCT. PCT always needs to be the day it's occurring. So if a percent of time change is changing 1/15, that effective date on the position needs to be January 15th. Next, if creating a brand new position, we recommend using the first of the month. This will allow for more wiggle room on updates that need to be made before a TBT is completed. So let's say you create a new position and you weren't sure who the report to was going to be, so you just put some position number and then you find out it should be something else. If the person's supposed to start 1/15 and you created that position for 1/15, you're going to get errors down the line. But if you use 1/1, it gives you more effective dates to use to be able to make additional updates. Next is to pay attention if the position is filled. This will help determine if the update incumbents box should be checked or not. Be sure to use our position reason code guide to see what reason codes are allowed, not allowed. And then also on that guide, it tells you if that update incumbents box should be checked and what effective date to use if that position is filled. And then please remember that SOMHR approves position updates for faculty, but Central HR approves the position updates for university staff, retirees, and temp positions. So that finishes our position updates section. Are there any questions regarding position updates at this time?
Oh, here we go. If you use a 2/1 effective date for a promotion change, do you need to email corrections to delete? Since I assume the TBT for the pay rate change won't let me use 2/1 anymore.
So you can still use 2/1 on the TBT, that's fine. But let's say something else has to be fixed in between those times and you have to make a position update. You can't use 2/1 again, you have to use 2/2. And then you wouldn't be able to use 2/1 on the TBT because there's a 2/2 row now on the position that's kind of blocking it. So for now, you should be okay. But for those ones, I would say you probably use 1/15 for that PRO row. We've also noticed that when you're doing NPPs, sometimes if something's changed on the NPP that doesn't match on the position, it'll add a vacant row into that position update for whatever effective date you're doing that NPP on. And then that's kind of where we get into some issues as well, where the position's showing a random 2/2 row, and then it won't let you enter that TBT.
Can you use the same effective date and use sequencing?
So that's only on job data, and we will be talking about that soon. Sweet. And then if anything else is about positions as we're going through, we'll have time at the end for more questions too. So if there's no other last minute questions, we'll go ahead and move on. And it looks like we're good. Sweet. So next we're going to move on to template-based transactions. So TBTs are usually the last transaction needed to either create the employee's job data record or add to their current existing job data record. So with TBTs as well, you'll want to make sure everything we did in the position is done first before you do your TBT, because what we're going to go over is a lot of the information that's on the TBT feeds from what the position is. So always make sure your position is correct before you start doing a TBT. And then with that, if there is something incorrect on a TBT, we can have the option for these ones to either push back or deny it. So a pushback means you can go directly back into that current TBT and update what is incorrect. And then a deny means a brand new TBT must be entered in. So there's certain items that we can push it back to you, and there's certain items that result in denying it. So if we're pushing it back, it means that the effective date is incorrect, pay group is incorrect. We have employee type, comp frequency, comp rate code, comp rate, or adding, updating comments. Usually when we push it back to, we try to be as detailed as possible to try and make it easier to fix what is incorrect. And then you can go back into that template, fix it, send it back to us. If something results in denying, it's because the action or action reason is wrong. and then any item that would be on, need to be updated on the position would need to be denied. So usually when we see something wrong that needs to be denied, in our comments, we'll put what you need to fix and then to wait for a certain approval before you can enter in a new TBT. So I did just mention about action and action reason. Oh, first, sorry. So first, there's different types of TBTs. So we have hire, rehire, additional job, transfer, pay rate change, data change, leave, and termination. So myself or Alicia approve most of all of the first four, and then leave termination rows get approved by central HR. So what I'm kind of will be focused on next is the different action reasons for each of these different four different types of TBT. So the first thing we're going to look at is starting the TBT. So TBT start through the transaction launch page. So if you log into HCM and there's that big rocket ship, you'll want to click that rocket ship, and then this is what shows up. And then the search option is where you will be able to select which template you're going to be used. So those different types of TBTs, that's where the search option comes in. So you have your hire, rehire, additional job option. The job change search option corresponds to either a pay rate change or a data change. And then you have leave request, termination, and then transfer employee. So once you pick that and push search, this HCM job data field over here to the right will auto-populate if there is a current job data row, or if you're creating a brand new hire, there'll be something here that says create a new action instance. And then so from there, you're going to select the box of the employee and job record if applicable. So if they have multiple job records, you want to make sure you're clicking the right one. And then push submit down here. As soon as you push submit, a pop-up is going to appear asking if it's for a contract employee, and you're going to always select no for that. School of Medicine doesn't do contract employees at all. I think that's supposed to be a really good thing because contracts I heard are very complicated. And if you do push yes on that contract one, that TBT is going to look completely weird. So if it doesn't look right at all, then that means you probably pushed contracts. So you can just back out and start it brand new. So next, we're going to look at the effective date and action reason. So as soon as you push, so from the HCM data here, once you select what kind of action you want to do and push submit, we're going to come here and it's going to give us an effective date to change and then action reason. So the effective date will be the date the transaction needs to occur. So this person's starting February 1st. So our effective date is going to be February 1st. The date auto-populates to the current date. So make sure you update that right away. So similar to how we did our position updates, you want to make sure on the TBT, you're changing that effective date right away. So if you try to do one today, it's going to automatically put January 18th, and we want this to actually be effective February 1st. And then picking our action and action reason is dependent on what type of change needs to occur for the employee. And we're now going to go through that step. So the first one we're going to look at is hire, rehire, additional job reason codes. These ones are the easiest to look at because there's not many options to choose from, and there's only 3 different options we're going to select. So if you're doing a hire, new hire, if you're doing a brand new hire, the reason code is always going to be new hire. So that means they're brand new in HCM. They've never had a job record with us ever. So this is their brand new hire. Reason's going to be new hire. Rehire means they were formerly an employee and we're rehiring on usually their record 0. The rehire reason options, there's like 3 different ones. Just select with the rehire. So it'll be rehire on the action reason. And then lastly, we have additional job. So that's when an employee is going to have more than 1 job record. So we're going to be seeing a lot more of those now as we have slowly been transitioning a lot of our faculty admin stipends onto their own job record. So for those, that will be like their job record once, it's going to be an additional job. Or if sometimes we have students that have multiple jobs and they'll have multiple, so have to do additional jobs to give them multiple records. Next, we have our transfer reason codes. So the transfer reason codes, they give you a lot of options. I've really never figured out why we have so many options, but these are the top 4 that we stick with. So we have to another campus, to another department, just transfer, and to university staff. So we would select to another campus if they're coming from like UCCS or from Boulder, something like that. Alicia, our new person, she just came from UCCS. So when we did her transfer, we used to another campus because she was coming from UCCS over to us at Anschutz. To another department we're going to use if their department ID is changing. So let's say we had somebody in anesthesiology and they're transferring over to like immunology or something like that. Since those department IDs are changing, that's why we would use to another department. We're going to use a transfer reason code when the department ID is not changing. It's just that position number. So we were kind of seeing this a lot when we were having to post for senior instructor to assistant professor. So they had to move into a new position number, but that department ID wasn't changing. So it's going to be transfer. And then lastly, we have to university staff. This one probably won't have to use that much. It's only for classified employees that elect to become university staff. I think we only have like 50 classified staff, and I've used this reason code like 5 times. But if you ever are lucky enough to use it, you'll get to use university staff for that reason. Next, we have our pay rate change reason codes. The ones you'll probably use a lot for these ones is the decrease in pay, increase in pay. So that's typically if you're adding a stipend or removing a stipend. Demotion, probably won't ever use. I actually haven't seen that used, so you can probably ignore that one. Next, we have pay component distribution adjustment. So that one is if we need to fix BSI amounts. So sometimes we'll see that with someone that is moving to like assistant professor and their pay components need to be adjusted. We'll see that there. We usually use it a lot during the HCM or mid-year table uploads when something was missed on the uploads. We're having to add in, we're having to add in some, adjust some of the pay. We'll use pay component distribution adjustment. Next is percent of time change. So this is to show the updating of the pay rate change for the position that we did to fix those standard hours. The reason we use percent of time change for those instead of increase or decrease in pay is because when we're changing percent of time, their rate of pay isn't changing. So their pay is increasing or decreasing because they're working more or less, but that hourly rate is staying the same. So we still want to use percent of time as that reason, so that we're able to better track which ones are percent of time changes and which pays are changing because of something else. Next, we have promotion. So that's pretty self-explanatory. You're moving from entry to intermediate or something like that, and you're doing pay rate change promotion to give them their pay increase as well with that promotion. Restore pay, don't have to worry about that one. And then temp pay, increase in pay. It's used when you're overtime eligible and you're approved for like a TPD sort of thing. That rarely happens. So I don't worry too much about using that. And if you ever have to use it, let me know and I can help walk you through the steps. And then the last thing we have for our reason codes is our data change. So we have change in appointment end date, expected end date, and other. So the change in appointment end date is if you have an appointment end date and they're actually not supposed to be ending at that time anymore, so you have to change it. For those ones, we see it sometimes with like students are supposed to be ending at a certain time. But please note that on the appointment end dates, it will not result in automatic termination on the employee record. All it really does is it just makes you not able to give them any more position updates because the position is supposed to be stopping. The expected end date is kind of where you can use it to try and do an auto termination. So once it hits that date, it removes it. There's a guide there to kind of figure that out. I haven't had to use that too much. So I haven't really seen that come up too often. And then the data change we see the most is other. And that's mainly when we have to do a pay group change. And so we see that most often when we have like a research assistant. So it's like a job code 1505 and their job code is changing to a 3204. That's a pre-doc. They have different pay groups because they're taxed differently. So if you're ever having to change those, make sure you're updating that pay group because that'll affect if they're taxed or not taxed.
We do have a question. So if you're reducing an FTE to 0.25 and it's been completed in position, what action should be used for the pay rate change reason code?
So you'll use percent of time change for that as well, for that action reason. So those are all of our action reasons. So now we're going to hop into the actual template-based transaction. So it says position and job information. So there's a tab up here. And so if you're doing a new hire, you have personal information tab and position and job information tab. The personal information tab is like their social security number, their address, ethnicity, all that stuff. We don't worry about that stuff. We only worry about what's underneath position and job information when we're reviewing it. So the first part of the TBT, so from work location down to job information, is information that's pulled directly from the position. So all the stuff we just talked about at the position updates, that's everything that's here. So as you can see, we have like our position number, the department ID, our job code, standard hours, FLSA status. So this is one where if the information is wrong anywhere in any of these regions, we're going to deny the TBT because we can't actually edit anything in these fields. So you'd have to do a position update. And then once the position update is approved, then you can submit a new TBT. So the common errors we usually see on these is the job code's incorrect or the standard hours are wrong. And we usually are able to tell because we match it to the letter of offer. So the next part of our template is we have information from the job payroll information all the way down to the comments. And all of this stuff is updated directly in the TBT. So these fields are actually editable. So here's where you enter in your pay group, your employee type, your comp frequency, comp rate code, and comp rate. And then our HCM parameters guide does help in determining what pay group should be with what job code, what comp rate code should be used, etc. And then also do remember that comp rates should be entered at the monthly rate. And then please also remember that all TBTs require some general comments. And then all hires, rehires, transfers, and additional jobs typically require a PMR code as well. And then some helpful tips over TBTs. So please remember that to attach the fully signed lieu to the TBT, we often can't approve it until we have a fully signed lieu. So if it's entered in, we don't have a fully signed lieu and we are not able to find it, it just kind of has to sit there until we're able to get that fully signed lieu or find it. So it saves us time from one, having not to go find the lieu if it's already attached. And if you wait till it's fully signed and it's there, then as soon as we're reviewing it, as long as the information is correct, we can approve it immediately. So that just helps speeds up the approval process all around. Next tip, make sure your pay group matches your FLSA status. So if the employee is non-exempt, pay group needs to be UOT. And the reason that's so important is because the UOT pay group is what allows for overtime to be calculated in MyLeave. And then also if you're having to enter in overtime manually, you need to have that pay group in order to get the correct earn codes to use in CU time. And then lastly, remember the PMR code in the comment section, and the PMR code is only required in TBTs where a search was involved. So that concludes our TBT section. Are there any questions there?
What does PMR stand for?
So that's the personal matters report. I actually just realized our guide's not here. So that basically just kind of shows what rec they went through. So it's that CHRREQ and then the number. Or if it's an appointment type 1, it's CHRRAPPT1. So what that does is those codes go in, and then once it's approved, Central HR runs a report, and they're able to use those codes to pull out and ensure that the person that was placed in there actually went through a correct search. And then if it's accidentally approved and it doesn't have the PMR code, they reach out to us and we have to then go find it. So it helps us save a lot of time if the PMR code is there. Looks like. Oh, we have one more from Lindsay.
Late PMR code only needs to be entered if the transaction is being entered after payroll has run for that month.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So the late code is only needed, and it's based off of payroll. So we're still in January payroll. So anything with a January effective date isn't considered late because payroll hasn't run yet. If you use something with December or after, that's considered late because payroll for that month has already run. And then it looks like Makidra also just attached our PMR process guide. Thank you, Makidra. So download that, and then that'll kind of walk you through the different codes and what it looks like. Ooh.
I'm not seeing any more questions.
Okay, sweet. So we're now gonna hop on over to job data. Okay, so we just did position updates and we just did TBTs. So both of those things we're working towards is to get it into job data, because job data is what's gonna ultimately affect payroll. So as we had for the position updates, job data has 5 different tabs. So we're gonna go through each tab. So this first one is the work location. So an employee's job data record is again created after position updates and TBTs have been approved. So if we look, you can see this is the employee. It's my lovely self, and then my employee ID, my employee record. The next thing we see is work location details, and that'll show the most recent change made to job data and whether it was a position update or a TBT, etc. So if you look here, the effective date, the most recent change was done July 1st. It shows it was a pay rate change. The reason was merit-based. So that just shows my boss likes me. She gave me a merit. Thank you. So unlike on the position data, in job data, the effective date can be used more than once. So this is where Lori was asking about effective sequencing. And we can always tell the effective sequencing based underneath that work location details. This effective sequence will show, so 0 means this is the only one on it. And then as you use more of the same effective date on job data, it'll add to this effective sequence. So you'll usually see this a lot with, again, percent of time changes. You do a position update first for that effective date. So let's say January 1st is the position update. It feeds into job data, that's effective sequence 0. And then we do our TBT, pay rate change, percent of time change, that gets approved. So then that'll then layer on to job data, and that'll show the effective sequence 1. So when payroll runs, it'll be based off of the most recent effective date and job sequence 0. Because someone can have many job rows in their job record. It's going to look at just the most recent one, and that's what payroll is going to base its pay off of. And then the remaining fields down here mirror again what's on the position. So again, here we can find the position number, shows us the region, company, business unit, department. All of the stuff that we went over on position update is found here in job data. Next, we have our job information tab. Another thing I do want to point out is similar to how we had the work location, this top row will kind of follow you in each different tab. So that part will be the same throughout. And then down here, it's the work location again, where majority of this information is found on what the position was. And then to view the FLSA status, make sure you click that FLSA drop down to see if it's exempt or non-exempt. Here's where we see standard hours and FTE. So this is another good way if you're able to tell if the standard hours field didn't correctly feed over into that FTE field. So sometimes we'll see it showing like 20 and that FTE is showing as 1.0. That'd kind of be like, oh, maybe we should fix this. And then there you'd want to update the position to get the FTE field fixed. Next, we have our payroll tab. So the two main items to look at under payroll tab are the pay group and employee type. So pay group is important to have it correct because again, it affects leave accruals and overtime being calculated if they are overtime eligible. And then also with faculty, if you accidentally use FOT, that pay group isn't eligible to actually accrue leave. So they won't be accruing leave even if they should be. And then the employee type is important because that helps differentiate if someone is salary at a salaried rate or if they should be getting paid at an hourly rate. Next, we have the compensation tab. This is probably the more important tab underneath job data. So the comp rate, you can view the comp rate as annual, monthly, daily, and hourly. So that'll show you here the annual rate, your monthly rate, daily, hourly. I don't really think we use daily rate too much. I usually pay attention to annual and monthly, and then that hourly rate as well. And then down here it also shows how the pay is split between multiple pay components, if there is multiple pay components, and then pay is based, hold on, there it goes. Pay is based off of the amounts listed underneath the pay components section. So it'll look at this comp rate over here, and all of these added together will add up to what that compensation rate is. So when payroll runs, that's what's going to pay out. And then lastly, just some helpful tips for job data. Remember, the same effective date can be used multiple times for that. And then pay is based off of the most recent effective date and sequence. Are there any questions over job data? Nope.
See any?
Sweet. Okay. Well, I need to get some water because I've been talking to you guys a lot. So let's take a quick 5-minute break and we'll come back at 1:50. Let me get. Okay, sweet. So now our notes. Let's go. Hold on, maybe. There it goes. Okay. So next thing we're going to talk about is promotions. Before we fully hop into promotions, I do want to point out this is just the mechanical parts and how to enter in the promotion into HCM. There are other steps that need to be taken. So we're going to do like staff promotions. Obviously, there's like a smart sheet approval, salary approvals. There's other things that need to happen with the promotions. What I'm focusing on with this part is just how to get it entered into HCM and then the correct codes and effective dates to use to get that entered in. So the first one is promotions for university staff. So if you look over to the right, this is where effective date, we recommend it be prior to the potential date of promotion. So you usually recommend 2 weeks. The reason code for that is going to be PRO for promotion. You want to change your job code, and then you want to change your working title, and then review any other fields that may need to be changed. So for example, you see this full-time, part-time fields wrong, you can change them. Here is where it's a little bit different. So the position is filled, but we're backdating it and we want this box to be unchecked. The reason it needs to be unchecked is the job data record doesn't need to reflect the new job code because it's not considered fully approved yet until Central HR approves it through that NPP. So I know we approve it through our smart sheet, and that's SOMHR approving the promotion, and then you update your position, and then when you do the NPP, Central then has to review it and also approve that promotion. And then from there is where it actually is approved. And then we'll talk about in a minute. Oh, actually, it's the next slide. So that's why I want it to be unchecked, because the promotion's not for staff isn't fully considered approved until the NPP has been approved by Central HR. So now we got all that fun stuff approved, and now we're in the TBT part. So you're going to create your TBT. The action reason is going to be pay rate change promotion. The effective date for this one will now be the effective date. So they're supposed to get promoted January 1st, 2024. That's going to be that effective date on that TBT. And then when you're entering in the pay rate change promotion, the updated job code is not going to actually show up on this position. And that's because when you're doing a promotion TBT, it's reflecting what your job data is showing. And so job data is not showing that updated job code. So it's not going to show up on the TBT. That's totally fine. It's what's supposed to happen at this moment. When we are approving the TBT, we're double checking that you've updated the position to show that correct job code. And then after we approve, we get a list together and we send it to Loan and we ask her to refresh the employee job data. And then that'll pull over the updated job code. So I know none of that it's confusing and it doesn't make sense because that's kind of where the system kind of gets broken a little bit. And this is our current workaround for it until that gets fixed. So what happened with that is like 4 or 5 years ago, we updated the system to have template-based transactions, and that part just kind of didn't carry over. So that's just kind of our workaround until we're able to update the system again. So that's staff promotions. And now we're going to move on to faculty. So faculty is a little bit different. So the effective date for a faculty promotion should be the date it's actually occurring. So if it's happening, this one's happening July 1st, 2022, that's the effective date it should be. And the reason code for that one should be FAC instead of PRO. And then again, you'll change your job code, change your working title, review other fields. And then for faculty promotions, you want to have the update incumbents box checked because we do want to feed into job data right away. And the reason this one's checked and then promotions for staff aren't checked is because it's just different processes for promotion for staff and faculty. And then if the salary increase was included on table 1, no other action reason is needed. And then if the salary increase is outside of the table 1 process, you'll need to follow faculty affairs' EFRF process and then do a TBT to update that as well. So again, here, we're going to look at our TBT. We have a pay rate change promotion for that effective date and the action reason. You want to update your comp rate. If they are promoting up to an assistant professor or higher level position, you want to make sure that you are updating those comp rate codes, so your base M, to reflect that new BSI amount, which we will touch on a little bit later as well. And then also make sure you're attaching that fully signed addendum lieu and adding general comments to the TBT. And then some helpful tips over promotions. Remember that staff and faculty have different promotion processes. University staff use the PRO reason code. Faculty use the FAC reason code. You want to make sure you look at that update incumbents box. And then again, as I said earlier, the FAC reason code will automatically change those standard hours to 40 if they're not already there. The PRO might do that as well, so double check for both. And then be sure to change them back down if they're not supposed to be at 40. So if they're supposed to be at 32, change that down to 32. And then if a faculty promotion to assistant professor are higher, be sure you're updating those comp rates to reflect the correct BSI for new rank. And it looks like there's a couple questions for promotions.
So for staff promotions that don't have a job code change, would you still use PRO for the reason code?
So for staff promotions that don't have a job code change, there doesn't need to be a position update. But on the TBT, we would want to use, actually you'll want to use base pay increase in pay because that job code's not changing. So that's an inline change. So we're not actually showing a promotion. So use pay rate change, base pay increase in pay for that.
And then faculty promotions have to be entered by an HR business partner. This is not done by faculty affairs, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the HRBP has to actually enter it into HCM, and then you also have to report it to faculty affairs through their smart sheets and get that addendum routed.
And then for faculty going from instructor or senior instructor, do we use the FAC or the PRO reason code?
You'll use FAC because it's a faculty position. Sweet. Those are promotions. Next, we're gonna go through some fun math. Anytime I ask somebody if they like math, they always tell me no, but my goal is to make everyone at least like basic math, because I do. So calculations for percent of time FTE changes. So the formula we use when we're calculating a percent of time change is we're gonna take the old FTE amount, we're gonna take the old monthly salary, divide it by the old FTE amount. And then once you get that number, you're going to multiply it by what the new FTE amount will be, and then that's your new monthly salary. So for example, we have an employee that is at 0.8 FTE and they're moving to 0.9, and their old monthly salary is $4,000. So to get the new salary, we're going to take their old salary of $4,000 and divide it by their old FTE of 0.8, and that gives us $5,000. So that $5,000 rate is what their dollar amount would be at a 1.0 FTE. We're then going to take that $5,000, multiply it by the new FTE rate, so that 0.9, and then tells us that our new monthly salary is $4,500. So then the new monthly salary is going to be $4,500. You can do this. I've seen people that like to do the annual amount instead of the monthly amount. That's totally fine as well. Just when you're entering it into the TBT, make sure you're using the monthly rate. So divide it by 12, or we'll have to push it back and have you put in the monthly rate. There is a slight change for certain calculations on percent of time and FTE changes, and that's if there's a faculty admin stipend included with it. So typically for those, a faculty admin stipend is separate from what their current role is. So if their FTE is changing, usually that faculty admin stipend won't be going up or down with the FTE change because it's completely separate from their regular job. So if your monthly amount does include a faculty admin stipend, so that's your base ADM comp rate code, you want to be sure to first subtract out the admin stipend amount. So here's another example. So again, we're going to go with the 0.8 FTE and they're moving to 0.9. So for this one, we're going to say their old salary is $7,000 and it includes a $1,000 stipend rate. So to get that new salary, the first thing we're going to do is you want to subtract the $1,000 from that $7,000. And so the amount we're actually calculating is going to be $6,000. So then we're going to do everything else we just did with the 6,000. So 6,000 divided by 0.8 is 7,500. So that's our 1.0 rate. And then you're going to take that 7,500, multiply it by 0.9, we get 6,750. So the monthly amount without that stipend is 6,750. So you want to make sure you add in that 1,000 again. So your total monthly amount is going to be 7,750. And then when you're entering it into HCM, so in that TBT, your base ADM is going to stay at 1,000, and then your base, if it's a just instructor or something, your base up will be this 6,750. If you're assistant professor or above, it's going to be between your base M and your base up. Are there any questions over the math?
Not seeing any.
Sweet. And thank you, Christina. I'm happy someone else likes math. Okay, so next we're going to hop into the BSI and multiple components of pay. So sometimes pay is split between 3 different pay components. So we have base M, base up, and base ADM. So base M stands for base monthly and is the main pay component for university staff. And then it's also the BSI amount for faculty that are in an assistant professor or higher position. Base up stands for base supplement. So that is going to be the remaining regular pay for those in the assistant professor to professor job codes, and is the main component for your instructors, senior instructors, your research faculty, and other faculty job codes. And then base ADM stands for base administrative stipend, and that is only used to pay faculty administrative stipend amounts. And then these are always entered in again at the monthly amount when entering in the TBT. So to go off of more with what BSI is, our next slide is going to touch on what that is. So BSI establishes the minimum salary required to be at an assistant professor or higher rank. And new BSIs are set each fiscal year and go into effect July 1st. So usually to hire anyone at the assistant professor or higher rank, they need to be paid at least at what the new BSI states. SOM Finance does help get these established in each year. They help get these established each year. And then we double check that each higher pay rate change matches these new rates when approving the TBTs. These are also prorated based off of FTE. If a faculty member is not at a 1.0 rate, then that base M is prorated to match that rate. So for example, if you have an assistant professor at 0.8, their monthly base M will be 5,623.464. And we get that amount by taking the current assistant professor. So this is their annual rate. So the 84,352 divided by 12 is the 7029.33. You're gonna multiply that by 0.8, and that's how you get this 5623. And then the base up is the remainder. It looks like we do, so that's BSI. And then for BSI also, we usually get the new rates around like February, March-ish. And so we'll update our parameters guides and let you guys know that make sure starting July 1st using these new rates. And then when we're approving, we make sure that if it's a July 1st or after, we're using those new BSI amounts.
There's a rounding question. So do we round up or down for digits greater than 7 after the decimal?
So it only goes up to 6. I usually round up. It's so far out that I think if you want to round up or down, you can, because at that point you're getting to like the very, very minuscule decimals. If you have a grants person and they want it needs to show a certain amount, it needs to go that far out, I let them know. When we're looking at it, we really look up to like the first 2 or 3 decimal places.
And then postdocs are always just on base up, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And then that's also will show on our HCM parameters guide as well.
Okay, I think that's it.
Is that true for APPs as well? That APPs are only on BAS up?
Are they instructors or senior instructors?
Yeah.
Then yes, they'll only be base up unless they have a faculty admin stipend, then they can have the base ADM as well, but they'll never have base M, it'll only be base up.
Okay, thank you.
And then the new BSI table comes out in like February or March.
Oh, sweet. So we'll have an updated parameters guide probably at a meeting soon. Sweet. Okay, we are chugging along. So next is CU employee reported time. So CU employee reported time consists of 4 different tabs. We have employee details, batch and my leave manual, one-time payments, and regular earnings. So each tab has different uses, and you can only use it for certain types of payments. So the first one we're going to look at is employee detail. So when we look at the employee details tab, the main ones I'm concerned about is the off-cycle box, speed type, entry type, and status, and sometimes the approval date. So if we're looking at off-cycle, if you want something to run with off-cycle, you need to make sure that that box is checked, and you want to make sure you're using appropriate dates in order for off-cycle to get picked up. So for off-cycle to get picked up correctly, the effective dates being used has to be with a payroll date that's already run. So for example, we're in January payroll right now. So if you were trying to pay something off cycle with January effective dates, since January payroll hasn't run yet, it's not considered late and it's not going to run with off cycle. So for example, for this one, the earn dates up here showing December 2023. So let's say I need one of these to be off cycle. Since December payroll has already run, as long as we check this box and it gets approved, it'll pick up with that off cycle. Next is the speed type being charged. So if no speed type is showing, the speed type that's going to get charged is usually what's tied to your position. Usually we see speed types entered in for like UOC payments because the UOC that's going to get charged, there's a certain speed type that needs to get charged. If it's left blank, it's going to charge whatever on the current faculty member's position funding. Next, we have entry type. So this will kind of show the type of payment being made. So this is going to correspond to one of these 3 tabs. So if you use MyLeave, it's going to automatically put in MyLeave once you feed it into CU time, and it's going to fall underneath this tab. If it's a one-time payment, it'll be under here, and then regular earnings under that tab. Next, we have status of payment. So if it's showing approved, it means it's been approved and it's pending payroll status. So for example, for these leave ones, this is leave for December. And so once January payroll runs, it's going to get changed to sent to payroll. And that means it has now been sent to payroll and it'll process with payroll and will pay out, or it may have already been paid out. Next is denied. So denied just means the entry has been denied and will not pay out. And then the last one is needs approval. So if you enter in like a one-time payment and it hasn't been approved yet, this status is going to be showing as needs approval. And then this approver name here is going to show who approved it. And then these last 2 things are going to show when it was approved. And then the date and time created is when it was actually entered into CU time. So the main time when you'll see discrepancies between the date time modified and the date time created is for something like a one-time payment. So say we have a UOC payment, someone entered it in on the 12th, and then if they were approved on like the 14th, this date time created would show 112, and then the day it was approved would show 114, and then the approver name would show whoever the appropriate approver was that got that in. Our next tab is batch and MyLeave and manual tab. So again, if you're using MyLeave, this is where your leave will feed in to show your vacation, sick, the admin leave that was approved and that will process with payroll. Also here, if you're manually entering in a back pay, vacation, sick, accrual, you can enter it in here, and we kind of recommend that you put it in here. And that's because you're able to leave a comment here in the long description, and that's sometimes preferred. So that way, if someone needs to come look at why something was paid out, you're able to leave comments to be like, oh, payroll was missed 4% of time change, entering in back pay, or something like that. Next, we have our one-time payments tab. So this is where payments that usually aren't part of normal payroll and typically only one time will go. So our most common types of one-time payments are UOC, UPI payments, REC or MVT payments, and then the MVP, so that move pay one. So if you're not using the CU Health app plan, you should. You get $75 free before taxes a quarter, and that's just kind of where you'll see it pay out. And then again, on this tab, the only 2 fields you need to worry about is the earnings code and then the amount. I don't really think there's any one-time pays you'll need to worry about hours. So it's mainly make sure you're selecting the correct earnings code and then you're putting in the correct amount. And then the last tab we have is our regular earnings tab. So items here. So if you're entering in hours for hourly employees, so we see that a lot with like student employees, back pay if a paycheck was pulled, leave gets loaded here too if you're uploading it through a batch. So if you do a batch upload and then you get that entered in, instead of it feeding in through the MyLeave one, it comes in through this regular earnings tab. Also be sure to pay attention to the hours and amounts column. Some entries might require the number to be entered in as hours, other as amount. So like for vacation, we're going to enter that in as hours. But if you're doing like a back pay, like an REG back pay, that'd be entering as an amount as opposed to an hour. And then also the things that you enter in under regular earnings can be self-approved. So after you enter all this in, you can go back to the employee details and that status that we were talking about. You can change that to approved and saved, and then it'll get picked up with the next payroll running. So some helpful tips over CU employer reported time. So again, for off cycle, make sure you're aware of the effective dates that you're using. If payroll for the effective dates being used hasn't run yet, it won't pick up with off cycle. And then also be sure to check that off cycle box. If you don't check that box, even if you're using old dates, it's just going to run with whatever next payroll period is running. Once a row is entered and saved, we can't delete it out. We can only deny it. So sometimes we'll get requests asking to delete it. We can deny the row, but that deny row always is just going to be there. And then lastly, if there's a big batch of items that need to be uploaded, we recommend completing it as a batch upload instead of entering it in one by one. Not only do you have to enter it in one by one, but then we then have to approve it one by one. And that is just very, it's a tedious task on both ends. So There is information here on how to do a batch upload. It can be a little touchy. So if you are interested in wanting to do it, let me know and I'm happy to walk you through it and helping you get your spreadsheet set up. So once you do it a couple times, it's pretty easy. But getting it going does take a little bit of work because it's the spreadsheet you use for the batch upload can get very touchy. Is there any questions on our CU employee report type? Nope. Sweet.
Not seeing any.
We're almost there, guys. Almost there. Isn't this so fun? Lastly, last two things I want to look at is our payroll deadlines. So I wanted to go over our payroll calendar. So the main thing with the payroll calendar, because we talked a lot about payroll, so I just kind of want to talk about the payroll calendar and kind of how we get the dates we set with it. So everything in pink has to do with monthly payroll. So what we usually do is we look at when payroll runs. So if you see MON uploads due at 5 p.m., that means that's when payroll cutoff is for that month. So that means everything that's going to affect payroll for that month has to be both entered and approved. And then Loan likes to put her deadline dates here. So vacation payout forms due to HR, and then additional pay deadline for the central HR one. Anything that's green has to do with biweekly payroll. And then anything that has to do with off cycle is blue. And then if there is a campus closure, it's included on this calendar as well. Another thing I want to point out is if you do have to pull a paycheck, make sure you're looking at the right pull deadline. And if it's biweekly or monthly. So MON is monthly and then BW is biweekly. So just some helpful tips on those. So the colors on the payroll calendar. So pink items are monthly payroll, green is biweekly, blue is off cycle. There is no off cycle the week of payroll cutoff. So unless payroll cutoff day falls on a Friday, there is no off cycle the following week. But for example, tomorrow's payroll cutoff for January. So there's actually not going to be no off cycle next week. And then also please be cognizant of our paperwork deadline dates and then read my lovely monthly email because then we break down those dates in more detail as well. Any questions over deadlines? Sweet. Okay, and then our last topic for the day is just reports available. So here's a quick screen grab of how to go look at the reports I'm going to talk about. So when you log into HCM, there is the Work Center. And then when you open up the Work Center, we have a Work Center tab and a Resources tab. You'll want to click the Resources tab. And then these reports down here are the most commonly used one. And then if there's other reports you want to use, you want to click here for all. And then it opens up another window. And then it gives you a bunch more options for different reports you can run. So some helpful reports that we use often is the leave accrual detail. So this returns leave information that corresponds with the CU leave accruals, summary page, and the detail tab, and results. For this one though, the results are only limited to one employee at a time. Another important one to use is the leave sweep. It becomes available as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, and that'll just tell you who is in jeopardy of losing vacation time and going to get swept. The payroll register one, so this returns paycheck information and an earnings breakdown by PPE. So sometimes if you're not sure if something got paid out, you can go to the payroll register and look up their employee ID and the effective of that paycheck, and it'll show you what they got paid and by what earn code. That's only for your department as well. Next is the personnel roster. This returns important job data for active employees, including supervisor information. Next is the time entry. So this will return a sum of reported time and approval information. So this one's actually good to check for pending UOC UPI payments. If you're not sure if something's been entered in and approved, it'll show you if there's anything kind of pending approval there. And then lastly is the training report. So this returns a history of completed training courses for current active employees. And it looks like we did have a question.
So what is the deadline for a 2/1/24 effective date?
Yes, great question, Lori. So the deadline for a February 1 effective date is Monday, January 29th. The reason that date is also important is we're getting close to the cutoff for merit increases. So historically, anything effective on February 2nd and after means they won't be eligible for a merit increase this year. So any hires, rehires, promotions that occur 2/2 and after, they won't be eligible for merit until next fiscal year. So just please be in mind as we get into February with those effective dates. And that concludes a lovely HCM deep dive. Is there any last minute questions? Oh, I just got a note, BSI will be available March 1st. So keep out for that.
Lots of kudos for Brendan. You're awesome. We know.
Sweet, thank you. I try very hard, guys, sometimes. But thank you all for coming to our first Elevate meeting of the year. Next week, we have our SMHR meeting. If you need to be added to either the Elevate or you know something needs to be elevated to the Elevate or SMHR calendar invites, just let myself or Deanna know, get that forwarded over to you. And then February Elevate is something with compensation.
February Elevate is going to be on salary setting and compensation practices. So just in time for budgeting season.
Yes.
So
that'll
see you
be
next month.
Yes, see you next month. So yay. So have fun with the weekend. I think it's going to be warmer, so we can pretend to be outside and go Bills.
Thanks, everybody.